Corporate and Strategic Committee meeting of Wednesday the 14th of March. Now, is everyone comfortable with the system being on auto?
Yep.
It's all right?
I don't like it.
So if I'm whispering stuff to Debbie, it gets called, mate.
No, Rex and I, we quite enjoy sitting together. It's been a few years.
It does too. It's a bit panicky.
You have to pass notes instead of stage whispers.
Yeah, you'll see that.
Well, it is on, so make as much noise as you.
Moving away a little.
Look, can I ask, are there any notices? No notices? Are there any apologies?
I have one notice. He happened to be a friend of mine, but he was a Hawke's Bay legend past
Yes, good call.
Paddy Donovan, and he had a huge influence on our region, and I think we should just acknowledge his passing.
Absolutely. Commonwealth Games medalist, Olympian,
Hawke's
champion
Bay
boxer, Hawke's Bay representative.
Catholic boy.
Catholic boy, yeah.
Catholic boy.
Yes. In Taradale, Catholic boy too lives.
Apologies, I've got one for lateness from Councillor Wilson, I understand, one from Councillor Dick.
Apology from Rick.
Councillor Barker,
Councillor
as an
Barker.
apology.
He had an urgent meeting with the government that he couldn't get out of. So they changed the time.
So he's out for the day.
He's out for the day. Yep.
Apologies for lateness, not accepted from Councillor Bailey or for...
Thought as much.
One says 2 minutes too up there, Chairman.
Those in favour of receiving those apologies, say aye.
I'll move.
I'll second. I'll second.
Moved by Councillor Bevan, seconded by Councillor Graham. All those in favour of the apologies being accepted, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, say no. The ayes have it. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? There are none. Confirmation of the minutes of the Corporate Strategic Committee held 11th of December 2017. I'm assuming everyone has had a little flick through those. Are there any amendments indicated in those minutes? You may recall the absence of Councillor Graham, Councillor Dick, Toro Waka and Mike Pakuat from that meeting. Councillor Belford.
On page 6, item 12, very last bullet deals with Russell Roads. And for completeness, I thought that there was a comment made that there would be some inquiry into what leverage, if any, we did have on this matter, as opposed to the way this is written, we just shrugged our shoulders and said it's Hastings Council's problem.
What page is this?
Sorry, which?
Bottom page 6, last bullet.
Councillor, have you got the right minutes? Looking at the colour there, you've...
I don't know.
That's the
It's
that's
council.
the regional council.
Oh, it's council.
Or council meeting?
No, not even that one. That's
Yes, you had me there.
Well, I'm
Councillor.
foreshadowing.
Great recovery.
Good recovery there, Councillor.
I won't even raise my next one.
Have you any other amendments?
It's a bugger being over 60.
So, can I have a mover that the minutes as tabled are correct?
I'll move,
Councillor Bevan. Anyone else? No one else is going to second that? Councillor Bevan moved.
Oh.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. So we've had a mover and a seconder with the council that the minutes are accepted. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. The ayes have it. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? And we'll go to page 2, page 3, page 4, page 4, Page 5, page 6, 7 and 8, no matters arising. Can we go to agenda item 4, and who's going to take us through this? Liz, are you looking at this, your eyes on this one, or are we looking? This is a follow-up from follow-up items.
Take us through this. So item number 1, so we had concluded, management had decided that it wasn't inappropriate to request the Port of Napier to change its reporting date. However, as a compromise, the Port of Napier has been requested to provide special purpose accounts to 30th of June, which is in line with our financial year. So the Port of Napier are considering the timing and the requirements involved with preparing special purpose accounts, and they will come back to us in due course on that one.
Excuse me, Chair, if I could just clarify, as I understand, there is a willingness to consider changing the date in future years?
Yes.
Yeah,
potentially.
there is.
Yes,
So that's
so
the-
with 18 months' notice, that was the understanding.
So the intention is still to change the reporting date, but to give 18 months' notice for them to get their affairs in order to enable that. And this current issue we're dealing with is how to do it in the current year, which is by way of a special set of accounts.
I gained a different perspective from our discussions. That fact, that would be a recommendation from the port.
From the port,
Yes.
I think it remains.
consider changing their balance date. I think they still consider it, they are open to considering it as long as they have enough time to prepare in advance. Yeah.
Recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee?
So we have a scope of the internal audit of the water management is to be confirmed by council. We have an updated scope.
That was considered at the Audit and Risk Committee meeting last week, and is in the recommendations from that committee through to council via this committee today.
And the Section 17A activities?
So it was recognised that it's an important piece of work that needs to be continued, so we agreed and confirmed that that would be a standing paper on the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. However, there's still some outstanding work to be carried out.
So we'll deal with some of these matters as a part of the recommendations of the Audit and Risk Committee. Any councillors got any items to be added to for follow-up before we get started for the agenda for the day? Is there anything that you need to have dealt with? Can I have a mover then that the follow-up items be accepted? Moved by Councillor Belford, seconded by Councillor Graham. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those against? No. Councillors, I just wonder whether to go to the front page of the agenda and just see if we could do just a bit of shuffling around. I think staff, you want to deal with, as the first decision item, the draft regional swimmable lakes and rivers first. So any objection to
That's correct.
To
Point of
doing
order,
that?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor.
Why is this subject in your terms of reference for this committee?
May I answer that through you, Mr. Chair? The issue is, councillor, is one of timing. The report from this was only received about the beginning of last week. We have to publicly notify our draft targets by the 31st of March, and there was no other opportunity for any other committee to consider it prior to it going to council. We're aware of your desire for double debate, and so the only option was really to ask Councillor Curtin to put it on this agenda.
And to ask me to agree to that
Yes.
change.
I agree with you, Councillor. This is this committee doesn't deal with such trifling matters. This is dealt with elsewhere, but apparently the imperative is to get it up and running by the 31st. So, with your indulgence, can we proceed with
With
that
my
item?
indulgence, yes, you may.
Thank you. So we've got a move of agenda item 7 up the batting order to 6, and we've got coming at 11 the Port representatives and Mr. Tremaine. I'd hoped, for example, to get agenda item 11 dealt with prior to that. So if we can get all these agenda items dealt with prior to that, that would be useful. There will be a presentation from the Port. Now that's not in committee, is it?
No, it's not. Although we are expecting that the chairman of the Port remain available for the public excluded discussion on the capital structure review, given the participation of the Port chairman in that process. So there are some matters around Port capital needs that obviously fall out of the capital structure review that will be dealt with there. But very much the 11 o'clock public session item is in relation to current activity and performance by the Port as opposed to those more strategic questions.
So we'll ask councillors to confirm the presence of Port representatives, Mr. Tremaine, given the capital review structure report, to be with us for that public excluded session. But we'll deal with that after the presentation of the Port of Melbourne. Any objections to those changes to the agenda? Thank you. Before proceeding to the decision item, can I ask if there are any items not on the agenda you want to have raised? No minor items, major items? So first, I would have thought. Think of something. All right, let's go to the swimmability item, which is item 7 on your agenda. Regional targets for small lakes and rivers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee members. This paper, and I do apologise for the length of it, but it is quite a comprehensive topic, and so in order to work our way through it, we have prepared a brief PowerPoint which Mr. Max was going to talk to, but I just thought I'd set out the context first. Just over a year ago, the then Minister for the Environment, Dr. Nick Smith, launched swimmability targets for fourth order rivers and lakes in New Zealand, and the aspirational, or the target that was being sought was 80% swimmable by 2030 and 90% swimmable by 2040, and that was a national target. And in order to understand what that would need, what would be involved in achieving that, regional councils were asked to determine what our own targets would be and where we were at. So there's been a collective piece of work done by the regional sector with assistance provided by the Ministry for the Environment as well as by a number of research institutes into actually coming up with this number. So in terms of the process, what we have to do now is asking you to set a draft regional target that we can go out and consult on and come back to have a final regional target by the end of this calendar year. So the information that's provided in this report is the Hawke's Bay part of the report for the whole of New Zealand for every single region. They're all different, and in some cases we haven't been able to, there will be a number of regions that won't get up to the 90%, and then there's going to be discussion then among the regional sector about, well, how do we work collectively to ensure that nationally that target is met. For the purposes of the new government, we are assuming that the targets remain the same. There may be some issues or some potential changes around seasonality because Dr. Smith's targets required 90% all year round. And I think Mr. Parker may recognise that there may be some practical issues with that. However, this is the work that's been done as a result of Dr. Smith's announcement, and Ian will just go through the context and the findings in terms of the Hawke's Bay region.
Can I just ask a question before you start? So the only signal you've had from the new government about what's been set by the previous government is around the seasonality, nothing else?
Yes, pretty much, yeah. To be fair, I don't think he's probably given devoted a lot of thought to it just yet, but certainly he recognises the practicalities of, swimming in the Clyde River in the middle of winter. I'll just move the chair.
Thanks, Liz. So just carrying on from that, so just a couple of other little bits of context. One is that this process was worked through in a partnership with the Ministry for the Environment. So the sector, and as Liz said, the sector and ourselves and CRIs and universities have worked collaboratively on developing the tools that have helped us get to the point where we can advise you of some draft targets. So Liz and I were involved in the task force that was central to developing this piece of work. And the other bit of context is that the approach that sits in the NPS as revised last year is one that came out of the Land and Water Forum, where there was a desire to move the conversation away from the notion that a river is either swimmable or not, which is not the case, except in some very rare situations where it may have geothermal water, naturally occurring geothermal water, or some natural contaminants, but that rivers and lakes are swimmable at times of the year and potentially unswimmable at other times of the year, depending on the level of pathogen or contaminants that may be in them. But it's not it's not a binary thing where they're either swimmable or they're not. And the notion was that the law said, let's try and move to a conversation that says we want to improve or increase the amount of time our rivers and lakes are swimmable. So if they're only swimmable 50% of the year now, we want to see that improve over time. So that's the kind of nucleus of the genesis, if you like, of the policy. The policy that was then created by the previous minister, and as Liz has said, there's certainly some discussion about whether the policy is absolutely the right thing, given that it does have an all year, all flows component, and as I think I've advised you before, if you're dealing with contaminants like faecal material that's the product of grazing animals on the land, you can certainly reduce or remove a degree of that through stock exclusion, but stuff that is deposited on the land well away from rivers can still be transported there by water following rainfall, and that's a pattern that we see reasonably consistently across most of New Zealand's waterways following rain events, is that you'll have higher levels of pathogens in the water, and that may not necessarily just be the product of ruminants. It could be birds, it could be feral animals, pigs, goats, deer, those sorts of things that are contributing to it. So just running through some further context, Liz has covered most of that off already. So the focus for us is on rivers that are fourth order or greater, so that's larger bodies of water. The point here being that that doesn't mean you just ignore the smaller rivers, because if you're not managing the smaller rivers upstream, you will never achieve the in-stream targets in the larger rivers. It's because water flows downhill. So,
Ian, can you just tell us what fourth order rivers, how are they defined?
So the orders of rivers go in a manner as such. If you have two rivers that have no tributaries and they join, so those two rivers are what we call first order. Where they join, that becomes a second order river. So if you have two first order rivers join, they become second order. When you have two second order rivers join, they become a third order river. Where you have two third order, and so on and so on and so on, through to, I think the largest in the world is something like 11th or 12th order. So as you add more tributaries to it, you increase the order. So it's really a relative indice of size. So the larger the order, typically the larger the size of the river. And in the case of lakes for the policy, it's a lake with a perimeter greater than 1,500 metres. So as Liz mentioned, there's targets set in the policy, 80% by 2030 and 90% by 2040, those being national targets, not regional, and there is some challenge for us in deriving or arriving at a way to achieve those targets, given they are national and that it relies on regions contributing to a national target. So we have to publish targets by the end of this month, and there's a report. This report backgrounds the work that we've undertaken to achieve that, and there's quite a bit of detail in there that I'm not going to cover off on this. So as I've mentioned, there was a partnership. The only way that we could sensibly deal with this was through a modelling approach, given that what we were looking to do is predict the impact of mitigation strategies, policies, physical works on water quality improvements in the future. There is a paucity of empirical studies nationally to help us understand what we call efficacy or the effectiveness of any particular mitigation strategy on reducing pathogen loads. And there was a fair bit of work put into using expert panels to help us understand that in the development of a model using NIWA's CLUES model, which is a catchment-based model, and University of Waikato economic modelling to help us understand the cost and impact of these activities into the future. Regions were asked to put forward what work they are either doing now or plan to do currently, so that we could understand, if you like, the base case, so we can look at what have we got now and what might we have in the future with these activities all operating at some stage in the future. And the activities that were put forward for this region are included in the report that's in front of you. I'm not proposing to go through those. Lakes weren't considered or modelled in this exercise just because of the sheer complexity of modelling lake water quality, because you've got a very complex biophysical environment, a lot of things that contribute to, in this situation, an interest in cyanobacteria biovolume, so what grows algae in lakes. Lakes are very, very difficult to model. Typically you end up having to model each lake individually, so there's no way you could devise a national model to do this. So for this exercise, lakes were not modelled. So to the results, under the base case, so the current situation, our rivers were assessed as being, as having 64% of them being swimmable. And I'll drop to the end of the presentation against the human health attribute. I'll show you the human health attribute that is the benchmark against which this is tested, and explain to you how that swimmability is assessed. As I've said, a range of interventions were then modelled, and the result was that the model predicts our rivers to move to 90% swimmable as a result of those activities in full flight, which is a reasonably significant increase. And that's just a visualisation of that. And the key thing to note here is the shift. So this is the base case here on the left, where you can see that there are different colours. These different colours represent different bands in the attribute, and the attribute exists in the National Policy Statement. So the attribute being human health, contact recreation standards, so it's a risk-based framework. And what this is telling us is that under a base case we have a reasonably high proportion of sites that fall in this D band and below, which is known in national policy circles as below the bottom line, i.e. not good enough. But the impact of the mitigation strategies, planned activities and policies are a shift out of that D band into the C, B and A band. So a push up into the higher bands. So that's saying that the risk of pathogens being in high concentrations in these water bodies decreases as a result of the mitigation activities. So for us, it's a confirmation, if you like, that what we're doing, if carried on and implemented fully, will have positive impacts on water quality in the future.
Ian, can I just, underneath the right-hand column, you've got projected improvement.
Yep.
What, by when? What's that date?
So there's no fixed date to it. That's just saying if you put in place all of the planned mitigations and activities as of today, if you had them all up and running today, that's the situation that you might end up with.
When?
Today. If you had them operating today, that's the situation you might end up with. The reality is that we haven't got them all running at the moment because we're talking policies that have years of implementation and delivery, stock exclusion rules, traditional land management activities, reconsenting of wastewater discharges that are going to happen at some stage in the future. So there's no, if you like, fixed date that we would say, by Monday next week this will be happening.
Or can you give us a clue?
Well, I think we could say we've got reasonable confidence that by 2030, which is the target date, that change is achievable.
That's what the report's saying, is that the draft targets are that by 2030 we will have achieved this. Exactly when, I couldn't tell you.
But that's also excluding the long-term plan step change.
Absolutely.
So the key thing to note, this is only in relation to what was agreed when this exercise was done in our current budget. So hotspot funding, what sits in Plan Change 6 by way of stock exclusion rules and the other things that we've got going on, it does not incorporate the step change that's proposed in the long-term plan.
I get that.
Yep.
My question is, and I'm surprised the model doesn't go there, is a date which the model would predict you would achieve that outcome.
Well, so that,
You're saying tomorrow that's not the case. If we put it all in tomorrow, it wouldn't happen.
yeah, well it would, because you're talking about stopping the flow of pathogens across landscapes. It's quite a binary thing. So the point being that these policies don't typically happen overnight. There's a lead-in period, and as the Chief Executive said, what we were tasked with is telling you by 2030 what do we expect the situation to look like. Well, we're telling you it'll look like this. Whether that occurs earlier, I couldn't tell you. Again, that's a product of how aggressively and how quickly the policies are implemented on the ground. It could happen a lot earlier. It might happen the year before. Don't know. So in conclusion, these targets are proposed to be published upon adoption by yourselves and then following the council meeting at the end of the month to meet our Policy A6 requirements in the MPSFM. There will be a report released during the week of the 26th of March that accompanies and supports this work that the Ministry for the Environment has been leading, like I say, in collaboration with the regional sector and NIWA and University of Waikato, so that will be publicly released. We will the work of the task force will continue throughout this year to have us do further work to understand how the final targets could be met to meet our December reporting requirements under Policy A6 again. There's quite a bit of work there, like Ms Lambert alluded to, recognising it's a national target and reconciling that across the country. And further advice will come to you throughout the year on what that work's looking like and how we might be looking to achieve that and what this region's contribution to that might be.
Councillor.
So a couple of questions. Firstly, I asked a question about the definition of fourth order rivers before. How many fourth order rivers are there in Hawke's Bay that this will apply to, and how many commonly used swimming spots are there that will fall outside of this net?
So all of our major catchments at their mouths are fourth order or greater. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the total length of catchment is, or the total river length that is fourth order or over. I'd have to get that information and come back to you with it. In regards to the swimmable sites, it's kind of difficult to say exactly how many sites are fall within the fourth order and how many are outside of it, because there's a range of swimming sites throughout the region. The majority of our swimming sites tend to be in the lower parts of the river, closer to the urban areas, which again fall well within the fourth water context. But I'm aware that there are a number of sites further up in catchments that people do swim in, so it's kind of difficult to give you an exact number. But the vast majority of the sites that we monitor and that we sample regularly and that are in our rec bathing program are in the lower end of the river, typically because they're close to town where people are going after work or on weekends.
The length's 2,986 kilometres.
Yeah,
It's in the
and
report,
the
is it?
report, when it comes out in the 26th of March week, has a map of the region showing the quality of each of the rivers, and there's quite a significant coverage right across the region.
Okay.
3,000 kilometres essentially.
Right, okay. Well, I'm aware that from previous information we've received, there's 21,000 kilometres of streams, rivers, etc. So it's actually not a particularly high percentage of the total. So it'll be interesting to see the map.
Sorry, just Councillor, the really important thing to bear in mind is that when you see the maps, you'll typically see that the water quality degrades as you come down catchments. That's not surprising. So the key point is that if you want to achieve the standards at the bottom part of the river, you have to work in the top.
Okay, so the second question I had related to just context for this. So this is under the national policy statement, right? Which is delivered under the RMA or not?
Yes.
It
It's
is.
an
Yeah.
main instrument.
So is there a plan to take this to the IPC as well?
As in,
Well, if it fits within the RMA, surely the IPC should be asked to form a view on this.
so again, it's a sequencing thing. So we've only just recently finished the work sufficient to provide you advice, and we need to publish it by 31 March. So very happy to take the conversation back to the RPC as context and further background to the work that may lie ahead of them in policy development, because I guess the important point being that December 18 is a much further forward-looking view on achieving targets. So that's the final targets, which may well involve further policy reform sufficient to achieve those targets. So the RPC would be involved in that, I suspect.
Any other questions, Councillor?
I have just, I mean, all these things are all very well and they're great, and I know you've got to do it, Ian, and I know your brain's in the same place as my brain.
Which is weird.
Which is, you know, I want to get on with this. You know, we have all these targets, and I mean that water thing, which what's that little blue thing there? I mean, it was rubbish, you know, from the government, yeah. And we're going to get on with the job. And I'm quite interested in a couple of practical comments that but really related to Tom's committee. But I'd like you just to answer now. Is there a way that we can stop dumpings from stock coming off? Riparian plantings won't do it alone. In a big storm, so we're still going to get a lot of stock feces coming into our drains from just a hill country. Do we have a solution to that? That's one thing. And the other thing is, I mean, and I know you're very focused on this, that we're doing this, the only way we're going to fix this issue is catchment by catchment. And I'm very interested, and I know the public's very interested, do we have a plan, and if not, when can we have a plan for the entire Ahuriri catchment? So we at least say, this is what we're going to do over the next decade in this catchment to stop these issues happening.
Good question. So I'll just take you back to this graph, and I guess this is the thing that I would probably reflect on, is that the modelling is saying that what we're doing is making a difference, or has the potential to make a difference. So that's the first point. Obviously, the more you throw at this, the more you could achieve. The reality is that if you have animals of any description, and bear in mind that's not just farmed animals, it could be feral animals, and catchments, warm-blooded, depositing faeces on the land, it is virtually impossible in heavy rain events to prevent that being mobilised and transported by water and into waterways. And that's the clear advice that we've had from a range of science professionals and people who work in the space all the time through this work. The obvious way you can deal with that is to take them off the land. But then you run into the absolute sort of crux of classic RMA planning processes is that you can, if you do that, that's an impact on communities, livelihoods, all of those things, and there's a scale at which you might say that's acceptable or it's unacceptable. The other part of this is, and it's the bit that there was a lot of discussion when the policy first arrived, there was a lot of discussion through the LORF table around what it should look like, is an understanding, certainly at the LORF table, that given that very challenge we just described, that it probably makes more sense to look at the key times of the year when people are engaged in primary contact recreation, so full immersion in the water. And that's not typically in winter and high flows. I accept fully that there are the odd person who likes being in rivers at that time of the year and kayaks and those sorts of things, but by and large, most of our recreational contact in water occurs in low flow times during the warmer summer months. And we know that in that situation, the best thing we can do is things like stock exclusion, because you stop stock directly depositing faecal material in the water. So that makes a major improvement, has major benefit. But it's virtually impossible otherwise to achieve that all year round while you have animals in a catchment. And again, you could take grazing animals out and still not achieve it because of the impact of birds. And we've seen in the case of Ahuriri that there is, on the odd occasion, avian faecal material in the water. Not surprisingly, as we further enhance these areas and create more habitat, we'll end up with more birds and potentially more faecal contamination from birds. So that you'll never remove that. So there'll always be that natural occurrence of pathogenic material. And then look, in regards to Ahuriri, look, I'd love to have a plan for Ahuriri, and as I think I've mentioned to this council table before, certainly that was number one on the agenda for the Ahuriri hotspots, where we're not quite there yet, working with Mana Ahuriri to achieve that integrated catchment plan, which sets out how we're going to get where we want to get to. It's a work in progress.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I too am concerned that this particular paper was not put before the RPC before it came to this committee to go before council. I think it's, in terms of that relationship we have with the Regional Planning Committee, I think it's really important that we do our utmost to make sure that these sort of issues sit before them first, before it comes to us. But my question, if you could go back, I think it's go back one slide, Ian. The third bullet point there, well, that's really sensitive. The plan program work has moved our region to, so when you're talking about the plan and program work, that you're talking about what we're looking at in the long-term plan is going to achieve?
No. So sorry, and that was the point that Chief Executive made, and I should have been clear about. This only includes the work as of about August last year. I think we started the modelling work, so it didn't include the LTP proposals because that was very, very early and it wasn't planned and programmed from the perspective of this work. So I'm envisaging that when we add that to the modelling, which we will do through the balance of this year leading to December, we'll have that figure improved further.
So, Councillor, the specific work that was included in the modelling here begins in paragraph 32 of the actual report. Sorry, it doesn't have a page number, but under the heading planned work, and it lists a range of some more detail, the information that was provided to the modellers when they were looking to do the assessment.
Yep. Well, I think what I'm trying to get at there is that at the end of the day, the targets that have been set, they are actually achievable by us here in the Hawke's Bay region, based on what we're doing already and what we're planning to do.
I would say that we're in pretty good shape, and that's the bit that I think, for me, that's the headline on this bit of work, is irrespective of views on the policy or the process. The story is that currently we're kind of we're a C plus in terms of swimmability. If we do the things we're thinking about doing and have planned and programmed and in policy, it's going in the right direction pretty significantly. If we do more, and we're planning to do more we're going to consult on doing more through the LTP, that'll further improve that picture. So that's the kind of good news out of that, and it just reaffirms that what we're looking to do and planning to do is the right thing.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillors, we do need to move on, but Councillor Bevan, you've got another question?
I'm pretty sure I read in the paper, but just asking for confirmation that what's being planned here is already covered in terms of the cost of delivery under our long-term planning budgets.
Correct.
Yeah. Under the existing long-term plan that's operative as of today, as opposed to the one that will be consulted on tomorrow.
Can I just follow up there and ask? I can't recall seeing any swimmability measures or outcome measures in the long-term plan. How do you are you saying they are?
I think so.
How do you intend to incorporate and develop against all of their inputs? I'm a little confused with the model, because the model, I had made an assumption that the model under the clues thing was using some standard inputs to achieve the improvements. But then you've said that you've inputted into the model some of our own specific work.
Yeah.
But clearly that hasn't been inputted in relation to the long-term plan over a 10-year horizon. Otherwise you would have had the improvements by 2030.
So you treat so the base model, if you like, is a catchment-based model that you then add in your regional catchment nuances, which we've done.
Not in entirely, though.
Not in its entirety. Like I say, it was a sequencing thing.
Sure.
Our proposed work wasn't available at the time, but it will go into the...
Okay, so my question is, is it possible to have that modelling complete prior to the 30th of June when we adopt the long-term plan, and we've got scope to actually incorporate in the long-term plan outcome measures based on that model?
So can I just leap in here and say that on page 49 of the community outcomes in the long-term plan, for water, our outcome measure number 5 is by 2030 all popular Hawke's swimming sites will be swimmable 80% of the time, and by 90% by the time of 2040. So they mirror what's required here in the national policy statement. I understand absolutely where you're coming from, Chairman, because I had exactly the same thought, which was if we could quantify the impacts on swimmability from the long-term plan proposals, that would be hugely helpful in terms of our communication of what we're going to do. Unfortunately, this is a modelling exercise that's been done at the national level, not by ourselves but by others, and therefore we don't have the capability to do that in a timely fashion, so we could include it in the public consultation materials. But I think it is fair to say that what we're seeing from this analysis, we can have confidence that what is proposed in the long-term plan is going to get us there in terms of those outcome measures.
Thank you. Are there any other matters, because we need to move to the recommendation, and obviously, councillors, we've got this going to the regional council meeting on the 28th, and obviously we can reiterate it again there. But as a remover for the recommendation to, are we receiving the report or making a decision? Adopting the report?
There's a number of recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
There's 10 of them.
I'm sorry, yeah, you're right. So we're back to, which page are we on? The recommendation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Page, no page.
No page number.
So it's at the end of the report. Gosh, no, it's in the middle of the report, isn't it? Has everyone got the recommendation page? Everyone's on there? Recommendations 1 through to 10. we comfortable with those?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move them with one wording change to number 7.
Number 7?
Number 7, I would just say including consultation with the Regional Planning Committee, just to
Yes.
make an explicit reference to that step being on our radar.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to make the same suggestion.
Other than that, I would just move it as is.
Thank you, Councillor Belford. Councillor Bevan, just before, are we clear on what the RPC consultation means, but particularly between now and the 28th of March?
Yes,
We
I
need to get
believe
a
so.
note to the RPC members, the full document, and advise them of the constraints and the. I think we should put on the RPC agenda the, if you like, the next step of this, which is clearly inputs from the aggregated version of this going
It's the
forward.
final targets. And so, Chair, just through you, so I'm absolutely clear, and I
The
appreciate
the intent of my language change was not to say we needed to consult with the RPC before the 28th, which seems
No.
foolishly unreasonable, but that we, in the spirit of what is being said here, that we will have a target now, we'll report back in December, and we will have a full consultation process associated with that. And step 1 of that process, arguably, could be talking to putting all this before the RPC at whatever its next meeting is,
It's next
wherever
week.
that is.
So, Mr. Chairman, our next, the Regional Planning Committee agenda, we're hopeful of issuing it today. So clearly, as Councillor Belford said, it's probably impractical to get something written onto the agenda for next week, and it is a full agenda. But so we'll aim to take a more in-depth discussion on this to the next Regional Planning Committee meeting after next week, so it'll be late April.
So, Chair, sorry, I was just wanting to get absolutely clarity here. I'm just reflecting on the Chair of the Environment Services discussion at the start of the meeting. So, are you asking us to take this discussion and the development of the final targets through to reporting in December 18 through the Regional Planning Committee in preference to any other committee of council?
What's the view around the table? My preference is to at least flag it at the next RPC, even if it's in principle we are going to a timeline. Alternatively, we say nothing and table it at the subsequent RPC. What's your view?
Well, my view is we should flag it and then table it at the April meeting as Liz has suggested.
Yeah.
Yep.
People comfortable with that?
Sorry, I wasn't conscious that the next RPC meeting is next week, and we have until what date is it? The 31st of March to make these targets publicly available. So I have to question why it wasn't brought directly to the RPC meeting next week in the first place.
We have not had any discussion in this meeting that would give us the basis for adopting any other targets than what this process has put before us. So if we want to have an hour-long discussion today as to whether 30%, 2030, 2040, 90%, 80%, 62% is the right target, then we have to have a completely different discussion than what we've been having so far here today. This is a box-ticking exercise. So let's get on with it. Let's tick the box, and we'll deal with the target over the course of the year.
Yeah, I have absolutely no. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's right.
I have absolutely no problem with you saying it's a tick box exercise, Councillor Belford. But I think the box should have been ticked by the RPC because it is a planning issue at the end of the day. It involves the national policy statement, and I think in terms of our relationship with the other members of the RPC, I think it's pretty unfair for us to be making that decision on their behalf. We have a planned RPC meeting next week, so I'm a little bit confused as to why it's come to this committee and not to the RPC. I understand you've said about a timing issue, but you would have had time to have put it in the RPC agenda because you had time to put it into the agenda on this committee.
Point taken, Chair, and look, I think we've got a clear steer that you want the further development of the final targets taken preferentially through the Regional Planning Committee, and that's what we will do.
Any other views on this? So at this point, we're flagging the issue at the RPC next week.
So we can include it as
Is
a
that how
minor,
you see
we
it?
can include it as a minor item if you like.
Any other views? All right, look, can I have a mover? You had a mover, haven't we? Councillor Belford, seconded Councillor Bevan. With that, the addition in point 7, all those in favour say aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you, and we'll look with interest at the RPC at the next meeting. It doesn't get too involved there. We're up to earlier. I'd suggested where we shifted the agenda item 6 up down the order. We haven't got the benefit of Councillor Barker's presence at the minute. Councillor Graham, do you know any idea what his ETA is likely to be?
He's not coming today at all.
He's not coming
He's in
today.
Hamilton.
He's in Hamilton. He's driving back, so that'll be. I told him. That'll be
So he
very
won't make
hard.
it. He won't make it.
So I don't think he'll make
I
it.
just thought that item was particularly, if it was possible, to have everyone here. But we've got a council meeting opportunity anyway, so he'll have to give us the benefit of his wisdom at that meeting. So we will proceed to, what's the time? It's 10 to 10. Let's proceed to item 6, which is the letter of expectation to HBREC. I'm assuming we've had a good look at that. James, are you able to...
I might hand over to Jess on this one.
As Jess is taking us through this?
Yep.
Thank you,
I
Chair.
just wonder with Alan, I
Oh,
mean,
yes.
he's not far away, but this is pretty important for him to
Yeah,
get
I
to
had...
it.
Yeah,
He was
okay.
coming back from Gisborne.
Do you have any expectation of his timing? Sorry, it just didn't arise. Do you know when Alan will be here?
He rang me to say he was going up there and was leaving this morning, but he shouldn't be far behind me. It's only a couple of hours.
Yeah. I think it's very important,
Shall I give him a
Councillor.
call
I
and
wonder,
ask
can we move on and come back to item 6? Are you comfortable to do that, Councillor Graham?
Let's do
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't we do the
So we'll do
Recommendations from the FAR
recommendations to finance, and we'll do 8 and 9 and see how far we get. So we will go to finance and order. You're doing this, Jess, as well, but I can comment on the way through. So we'll go to agenda item 8. So we had our Finance and Audit Committee meeting on the 7th of March. Jess, do you want to...
Yes, sure. So 2 items of recommendations from the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting, being around the 6-monthly risk assessment and management update. So the risk assessment update was received by the committee. We had quite a robust discussion around the items included on the risk agenda, and I think there was general agreement that it was moving in the right direction and provided a level of comfort for the panel members of that committee that staff were looking at items of risk and they were being well managed. There were a few areas of refinement of the report that will be taken into account and further revised for the next 6-monthly update. Further comment?
Yes, I do want to comment, and I hope councillors take a little bit of time to dive into the audit and risk, finance audit and risk agenda at some point. Just suggest that you just get your eyes on that. It's been a bit of a work in progress, the whole framework of the subcommittee, but we're arriving, I think, at the right place. We now have a risk framework which has taken a number of iterations. I think currently it's too long, and we need to now that we've got it a long form, we now to get it back to a shorter version. But I think the critical thing there is its usability in-house, that is within the organisation. And one of the suggestions we've made is for specific senior managers to take responsibility for, if you like, parts of it and check off their particular relevant areas of it, so it becomes a living document. The other areas that we've, in terms of framework for the committee, is oversight of the Treasury functions. Councillor Barker was very persuasive in having a particular look at our internal finances, so having a deep dive into various elements of the organisation. We now have 17A requirements, and if you're not familiar with those, they're reporting under the Local Government Act 2014. They are if you like, the business activities of the council. So we're much more focused on those activities. One of the things that came out of the last meeting was our oversight of the works group. It is operating somewhat autonomously, and we think it's a good idea for the subcommittee in the first instance to have, if you like, essentially have a somewhat of a quasi-governance role in regard to the works group, but we've asked them to come and report to this committee at least annually. That's so right. They'll report more regularly to the subcommittee, but at least annually to the to this committee. The other aspect, and we've got an emerging thing in terms of Treasury with our proposals to change the HBRIC and the port scenario. So we are now saying, okay, well, what eyes on the deep dive are needed by council, and potentially the subcommittee could do part of that, but being very much aware that this committee needs to also get eyes on there. We considered the port communications with council and felt that it was best that those communications are held at this committee as opposed to the subcommittee. I think this port visit today reflects that connection. I think that will likely increase over time as we work through our placement of that strategic asset in the organisation. So with those changes, we've had the other piece of work essentially are those audits.
Yes,
So
internal
do you
audit.
want to just quickly comment on where we've got to with the internal audits?
Sure. Not sure if Melissa wants to come up and talk us through where we are with the internal audit process. She is here, so she's the expert on this area, so she might like to give us an update on where we're at, and we do have some amendments to the attached scope of work for the procurement piece of internal audit.
Okay, so the latest one was the water management scope, which was delayed. The work has now been done on that, and we're expecting a draft any day now, so that will be presented to the next Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting. And at the last week's Finance, Audit and Risk meeting, we went through a procurement scope, and it was agreed at the meeting to extend the scope to include assessment of local economy and sustainability practices. So that has now been added into the scope as well, to reflect what was requested, and that work will begin basically once it gets agreed today.
Any questions on the scope for the procurement?
Chair, more of a comment. Really pleased to see that the scope also includes a discussion around the living wage, and like you say, the local procurement and ethical and environmental standards in our purchases. So I think that's been a really good move.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Hewitt, thank you.
I had a bit of a question and a bit of a comment on the works group. Can I put that in? You seem to have jumped over that. So I agree. I've been for a long time concerned about the autonomy there and the lack of reporting. So I was disappointed to see that they'd been reporting to the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, and I would have hoped that they were coming here, even if it was twice a year. I congratulate the initiative of more in-depth reporting, but just in terms of what this has told me here, and a comment on the minutes that were circulated. I mean, I've got words here like Hamish introduced Kathy, and I'm still none the wiser as to who that is. I wonder if that can be tidied up. But and just to stress that I'm really keen that that works group does report to the
Yes.
full committee. I think it's really, really important that
Sure.
the contribution to the organisation and what they do is not to be underestimated.
Yes. Look, I share your views, and Jess had initiated the works group coming to the subcommittee, and then the appreciation that we need to take that further. So this committee needs to direct the subcommittee. So if you've got ideas about what should come to this table, let us know.
That's one I would be interested in other people's thoughts on, because I certainly would like to see the works group
Sure.
turn up.
Yeah. And we should see it. It's an important part of the organisation. It does good work and is successful, but you need to have your eyes on it. So we will come back with a timetable of how we suggest that is presented, and for your comment, if you want those works groups presentations to be in this committee, that's fine. We can do whatever you suggest.
We did suggest
In-
6 monthly to come here, and then the next 6 monthly to the finance audit and risk, so you get at least an annual update. But if you'd like them more regularly, then that's appropriate as well.
I was just going to say that's what the minutes of that committee, of that subcommittee meeting say, is that it would be 6 months, that annually it would come to the corporate committee.
That's right.
But if you want it more than that, it's possible as well.
I'm happy with that, the way it's presented. It's annually here. I'm really interested to hear how they're getting on, what their aspirations are. I think that a report of that nature would be really good for me. I think on an annual basis that would be excellent.
Yep.
That's my view. It might be slightly different to Debbie's.
It's 1/4 the number of times Hawke's Bay Tourism comes to this committee.
I just wondered, was it a
They
finance
might not
audit
be
risk
back.
issue? But anyway, it's over to feedback from others.
I'm happy to stick with the recommendation made by the subcommittee.
Yeah.
End of day, yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've got those recommendations there. We've got the items 1 through till 4.
I'm happy to move.
You happy to move, Councillor Bailey?
I'll second.
Second to Councillor Graham. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Carried. Well, we will go to agenda item 9, which is the representation of local government of New Zealand.
Yes, I think, Chair, this one's reasonably self-explanatory. We do have an ongoing representation in Zone 3 of Local Government New Zealand, and typically Councillor Bailey has been attending those on behalf of the Council, and we just do need to formally resolve that he does have the mandate of the Council to vote on our behalf. So not a particularly significant paper, this one, just a process one to ensure that he is operating with the full authority of the Council.
A little bit concerned about
And-
2.4.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a concern.
Yeah, you skipped over that one, James.
So we're comfortable with Councillor Bailey being the delegate to the Zone 3 meetings, the local government. We've
So
got.
how will you deal with it if, I mean, for instance, there are issues that are pretty relevant to other councillors around the table? How are you going to deal with that, Rex?
How do you mean?
Or availability or top agenda items, that sort of thing? Will you include anybody else?
Well, various people will want to go and will go, but for the sake of the state of the nation, we do need to appoint a delegate, and it's proposed that we appoint Councillor Bailey.
Chair, can I suggest that if there are remits that are of any great controversy, we'll certainly bring them back, but traditionally when the remits are put forward, we have a process of bringing them to the Council for guidance, so I don't see that as a major issue. And yeah, apologies for skipping over 2.4 and 2.5. I think it's a given that the chairman
He's just been as smart as-
represents the Council on the regional sector group.
This is only, sorry, Chair, through you. This 2.3 only is for Zone 3 meetings and not for the AGM.
That's correct. For the AGM itself, we get 3 votes, and we have 3 councillors that have indicated an intention to participate, so they can work out between them, I guess, whether they cast a vote each, and or whether or not one delegate casts all 3. I do note that at last year's conference, it was the preference, I think, of the 3 attending councillors that one councillor stood in on behalf of the rest and cast all 3 votes. So I don't see any reason why that can't occur again.
Benton did a fine job.
No, I didn't. I pinched the bloody. I walked out with the clicker and got chased down the streets by Lawrence.
Is there any other issue you want to raise on this matter? It's pretty straightforward. So we've got recommendations 1 and 2, 2.1 to 2.5. I'm happy to move. Second, Councillor Barker. Councillor Wilson. It's moved and seconded. Any comments to make on this? No, it's all good. All right, I'll move.
I just have a comment actually. From a personal viewpoint, and I really appreciate the councillors who put their hands up to go to the conferences, because in the main these events are quite laborious, but I do find that, you know, out of the 100 things that are discussed, 2 or 3 are absolute gems, and you've kind of got to work your way through to get the absolute gems that make it really worthwhile going. So certainly that's my perspective. Going to the one in Wellington, it's worthwhile because of the gems, and I'm sure the conference will be the same.
Thank you. All those in favour of the recommendations, say aye. Those against, say no. Carried. Well, it's a little bit early for morning tea.
Never too early.
The Wild Boys. What do you think, Debbie? Should we have are you interested to actually have a cup of tea? Give Alan another 10 minutes, and come back. What do you think? Give it a go.
The coffee may not be brewed, but
yeah, well, that's okay. All right, listen, we'll come back at come back at 25 past. I've got a phone call to make anyway. So
We've only got the letter.